So our next session will focus on the Indian Ocean and world history. And Dr. Susan Douglas, who is the K-14 Education Outreach Director at Georgetown Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, is going to lead the session. And Susan also works at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. Susan was senior researcher on education for the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations and affiliated scholar with the Council on Islamic Education. She has contributed to numerous public history projects for the NEH. She's created curriculum for documentary films and has extensively contributed to online projects, such as this wonderful website, which you will all engage with today, the Indian Ocean and World History. She's the author of several publications, including World Eras, Rise and Spread of Islam, 622 to 1500, a children's book on Ramadan, and Teaching about Religion in National and State Social Studies Standards. Dr. Douglas has formatively and wonderfully helped shape this day, and your contributions have been amazing. So thank you so much for taking the lead on this new sessions, and I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to thank you, Elsa, too, for including me. And I think Professor Kusimba's lecture is absolutely one of the best I've ever heard. It really changed my thinking, and I really congratulate him for the amazing work that he's doing. So, and Kristen, I hope to be able to follow up on your wonderful themes that you raised. I am going to introduce first the Indian Ocean in World History website, which many of you I notice, and I also want to greet many of our CCAS outreach regulars that I see here and people that I've met around the country. So shout out to all of you. And again, here's the website that I'm working from. And what we're going to be doing in most of my time is being in breakout sessions and actually engaging with the resources that follow on these themes. So I'm going to just give a brief presentation on the Indian Ocean and World History Interactive website, which is sponsored by the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center of Oman, which is a word you've heard, a place you've heard about today several times. So first, before I do, and then I'll slip into presentation mode, I wanted to show you the actual website, which goes back quite a few years. And the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center took this up, and then not only took it up when it was just a glint in my eye, but also reprogrammed it when for the impending demise of Adobe Flash. And so they reprogrammed the entire thing. We have the whole idea of it is to reinforce teachers' ability to move from the old civilization by civilization model of teaching about the world and teaching world history to a focus on eras, world eras across the globe, which allows for the most important part of doing that, which is being able to teach about cultural interactions as a topic of study, having societies side by side within an era and being able to show how they interacted and actually, bring those focuses in on the interactions that both Kristen and Chap were talking about. So one other way to manage that is to if you have a curriculum that is based or standards that are based on civilization by civilization, this is an invitation and a means for being able to step back from that sort of march of civilizations one by one, the linear situation, and to step back and look at interactions during those periods of time after you've, of course, done your best to align chronologically align those societies. It also lends itself to a thematic approach, and in particular, deals with a very difficult thing, which is teaching continuity and change over time. So I'm just going to go back now to my presentation and leave the live website, but you can see that it is it has a lot of resources. It has learning tools, lesson plans that are ready, a lesson plan generator, and it actually has a brand new feature, which is a scholarly archive of material from the interactions with East Africa and the Indian Ocean. These are the contracts that were made. Most of this is 19th and early 20th century, I believe. And there's been a lesson plan put around that. So that's a brand new feature for those of you who already know the website. So without further ado, I will now go into presentation mode. Here is again the website, and what it consists of is a series of maps that represent trade routes in the Indian Ocean and around the Indian Ocean, connecting with the Indian Ocean across the eras. It covers, and don't laugh, 90,000 years of history in the Indian Ocean. The first numerous thousand having to do with the migration out of Africa that we know about based on prehistoric movement of people, archaeology, and also even paleontology, and also the DNA studies of human migration. And so then the more traditional ways of thinking about the region, the ancient, classical, medieval era, and so on. So this invites exploration of the ocean across eras. What's really interesting about the Indian Ocean is that it was the only major region, oceanic region, that was not affected by the freezing of the ice age. And that is one reason why so many exotic plants, spices and things are there, because their evolution was not interrupted by the ice age, as it was in so many other areas that changed the vegetation and animal life. So this website introduces 6 types of primary sources and routes: documents, geography, types of goods, objects, including archaeological finds, travelers, technologies, and as it says, routes. It encourages skill development because it introduces primary source skills with scaffolding. Based on the Center for History and New Media World History Sources resource. And it investigates, as Chap had mentioned in his lecture, Professor Kosimba mentioned, how we know what we know. It also includes lots of fun stories within and across eras that touch various regions. We'll be looking today at the ones that specifically affect the Swahili coast. So it's a very simple way to get into it. You can go on to each of the maps, and we'll see what those look like in a minute. You hover over the entry, which is based on a series of icons that represent these different types. Here's documents. Here's a little box that's an object. The little guy here is a traveler. And this little bag here represents goods. There are others, of course. Technologies is a wheel. Then we just click on the icon for the entry, and you can also bookmark these. You can create yourself a login, and you'll be able to save it to a bookmark lesson plan generator. The skills lessons that I mentioned that are coming from these are represented on the map key. And under each one of these maps on the map key is also a sort of scaffolding set of questions that students would answer when they encounter a different type of primary source from the ones that are here. And so very simple, like one for a question for routes: what important places does it link? How long do you think it might have taken to travel during the time it was used? So that represents the changing transportation over time. Then we have the ability to do a word search in the maps and also on the main site, so that if you type in the word banana, which also came up today, you're going to find all the instances of banana in all of the eras. So each one of those entries is then labeled with the era in which it appears. Um, One of the tools that you have is our graphic organizers that follow those questions. You can see here what they are on this. They're all in words so that students can write directly into them. And then you have one that is based on the ability to take, so for example, take an era and input the students that you've sent in to do it, and to look at the different types of resources here by taking notes right into the block. And again, that is in Word. So those are very handy because you can actually work era by era and have one group of students looking at the travelers, one looking at the goods, and so on and so forth. And then they all come back, and then the class together makes inferences about what was going on in that era. Perhaps if they've done earlier eras in the region, what changes have occurred in things like the terms of trade and the goods traded and the routes and so on, what's constant and what is changing. Um, then what you can do to test those inferences is to go to the historical overviews, which are there for each era. And you could also do it in reverse, which is to have the students read the overviews and then find the evidence that backs up what's in those overviews. But of course, the opposite method is probably a lot more fun to do. It represents the lesson plan generator where you can bookmark the instances, and that's very handy, a new feature in with the reprogramming of the website. Okay, so here's again what it is. This is the link is very simple: http indianoceanhistory.org. And it represents these primary sources. These are the maps, 90,000 to 5,000 BCE. Ancient era, 5,000 to 1,000, 1,000 to 300 CE, the so-called classical era, and then post-classical or medieval, 300 to 1450, first global era. And you really see the changes, and we'll be showing you what those maps look like in representing the Indian Ocean over time. There are sets of ready lessons, as I mentioned. There's a model lesson template. Then there is a guide to using the Indian Ocean and World History website throughout the year. And then there are thematic lessons across eras that actually combine the materials, or rather the entries from multiple periods to give you that sort of continuity. Like one of them is tea goes global. So tea is discovered in the classical era, or even the ancient, and then you find entries about tea all the way from its discovery, when supposedly an emperor, had a tea leaf fall into his cup of hot water under, under a tea tree, and then it goes all the way to the tea bag and marketing of tea in our own era. And then there's a similar one which gives us the story of blue jeans, of denim jeans, and so on. So anyway, here are samples of the maps. There's a timeline at the bottom of the map, which sort of has markers. When you hover over them, you'll see markers that would really just link that era to the events that students are learning about, and or events that are relevant to what's going on in the Indian Ocean. As I mentioned, the search bar goes with each of the maps, and the skills questions for analyzing primary sources right along on the map key with each and every map. And then of course you see here the entries. This is the ancient era map. This is the classical era map, which represents the expansion of trade routes, particularly being able to navigate out of sight of land. And that's what those technologies refer to if you were to click on them. And then you have here the medieval era map, in which in the world history standards from the mid-90s is referred to as the era of intensified hemispheric interactions. And you can really see that here on that map. That's probably not a term we use with our students on a daily basis. So here then is the first global era, and that's where you dramatically see the change in the routes that access the Indian Ocean, of course, with the era of the penetration by Europeans of the Indian Ocean directly by circumnavigating Africa. Here you have one entry as an example, the Manila Galleons, and another entry that shows here the Dutch East India Company. So that's where you really begin to see the terms of trade changing. And as you can see, as you've looked through these maps, the Swahili coast is represented throughout. And I want to just take us back here to see that from the very early, from the ancient era, probably also there was the beginnings of trade, but this is long before Islam. The classical era, still before Islam, you see those cities. And it's only partial because we have selected certain entries from there. It's not comprehensive in any way. But here you have in the medieval era, you see the real step up of what we know, partly because we know this from travel accounts. We know it from many other resources like Ibn Battuta's. And then here, the first global era, you see the Swahili coast as a very active site of trade and communication, technologies of navigation changing, the kinds of ship changing, and so on. We'll be looking at all of those. Here in the industrial imperial era, it remains a very important site of interaction in the Indian Ocean. We have the introduction of one of the goods here, the Mercani cotton fabric, which is ironically American fabric coming from the Lowell, Massachusetts, mills that the early factory women are producing. Being sold in Africa. And then here we have in the modern era, this map is based on modern shipping routes. And the remarkable thing is the continuity between the very earliest trade routes all the way through our modern times, including those routes along the East African coast. So here now is the introduction to what you're going to be doing in your groups. And I have followed the themes that Kristen brought up, and I'm happy to see that some of these have been represented during the day. This one of the groups, we're going to be composing 12 groups, and two of those groups, there are six sets of these materials, and each one is going to be handled by two groups that will probably have about 10 people in each. And so environment and geography was the first theme. This image shows a mangrove swamp on the coast. And then you're going to see here the names of the other things that are representative of environment and geography of the region. Again, not exhaustive, very much just selective. Here we go with the next one is going to be trade goods. And here you see not cut ivory. So you can know that this is, of course, from the era of photography. So already the era of colonialism. Vanilla ivory, a very interesting one here is copal resin, gum arabic from ancient times to modern as well, gold, copper, and ivory, mangrove poles, and then again the ending of the capture of enslaved people for sale. Places, again, not exhaustive, but definitely representative of the region, and we'll be able to explore those entries in your committees. Ships and transport is the technologies of getting to East Africa were extremely important, and I've included here kind of an outlier, which is the East African Railway, which was put together in colonial times, ironically also by Indian imported labor, among other and the visit by the Chinese. Here's one on travelers to East Africa. This, in fact, is a ship that was carrying so-called coolies, indentured servants from India. And you have many, many interesting travelers here that you'll be able to follow through the ages. And then finally, evidence of long distance trade. This is one of my favorites, and I searched high and low for these images over the years I was producing these entries. This is a Chinese porcelain plate, which is embedded in one of those tomb pillars that we saw in Professor Kusimba's lecture. So here again are some of these items which are representative of long distance trade from very early times. Here, cowrie shells as money from the Maldives Islands and various other materials that have been brought to the region. So here are the links, and I'm going to put those links into chat. Okay, no stress and joy. When you go into your groups, hold on a second. I couldn't, of course, copy those things. What's going to happen is you're going to access the folder. When you get into your groups, which will be random, you will access this folder, which contains subfolders that have the different materials for each group. Then outside those folders, in the main folder, is the breakout group questions for Swahili Coast entries, and you'll see groups 1 and 2. Actually, I don't represent them on this screenshot that I did, but you're going to see group 1 and 2 as the first one, group 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, finally 9 and 10, 11 and 12. So that, I'm sorry, that screenshot doesn't represent that. We were happy that we actually had so many people that signed up that we had to break up into 12 rather than 6 groups. So what will happen is each of these 6 groups, and you must, when you go into your groups, remember what your group number is, and then you'll go into the folder which contains all of them and take the one that is represented. First of all, you'll download this question sheet for your group, and or each of you can. Each group will share reading entries so that you can read as many of the entries as possible individually, and then discuss what the answers to those questions might be, only 2 per each group. And then you will be able to I hope, get some sense of how you might use these themes in the classroom based on these examples. Okay, I hope you got a chance to open the documents, that there weren't too many glitches with opening them, and that either you downloaded them opened, or in any case, if you download them, you have them for yourself forever. And I'd like to take a few minutes to just sample the different groups. If someone could raise their hand so Elsa can see, in the groups 1 and 2, environment and geography entries, how you dealt with the questions. Any volunteers are welcomed.
Well, I can say that I was struck with the ethical aspect of trades and the goods bartered, how they essentially did essentially what the St. Scots did, and they used what they had and placed a value on it, and essentially created their own currency system with what they had at hand and drove the economy with it. Traditional, I think a traditional receptiveness to barter trade and ethical barter trade probably even maybe what would have made it or either showed the Islamic influence or a receptiveness to it, because it looked to me like it was quite honest and simply of value.
You're speaking of the cowrie shells, correct?
Well, I'm actually thinking of the barter arrangements, that there were agreements as to what was fair and what was not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And a little question of ethics as to what something would cost. And they would change things according to what was the generally accepted practice. Essentially market-driven economy, but it was a controlled market-driven economy.
And that speaks to what Professor Kusimba said about the ivory. Okay, since we have only a little time, let me have one more from groups 1 and 2 on environment and geography entries.
Well, it might be useful to make the distinction between local trade and long distance trade, and the geography fits into this extraordinarily well because of the monsoon patterns for the long distance trade and the agriculture for the short distance trade. Ultimately, over time, they both interact because it's the long distance trade that brings in the cultigens like bananas and the like from the Asian countries. And it's the long distance trade that deals with high value to weight ratio items like ivory that are very valuable per unit of weight. But the local trade is crucial to look at as well for agricultural innovation, and especially the supplying of urban centers.
Right.
No urban center is agriculturally self-sufficient. It has to depend upon a hinterland that is producing for it, which is very well illustrated by the slides of the secondary school teacher who, in fact, spent a lot of time in Lamu. She pointed out that the agricultural space is not vacant there. That's in fact heavily and intensively cultivated to provide for urban areas. So the two different kinds of trade, I mean, schematically, long distance and local, are very useful to break into different kinds of categories, especially with reference to foodstuffs, construction materials, textiles, and then beads and pottery, which were emphasized by our first speaker.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very enlightening. And I will say also that mangrove poles were an object of not just local but long distance trade, in the sense that that the mangrove swamps were like a lumber yard for the Arabian Peninsula, where there are very few trees. So that's kind of an interesting one too. Apart from their extreme value as wetlands. So the places linked on the Indian Ocean. I'm sorry. The next one is trade goods. So if we could have two people on that quickly.
This is Catherine. I just wanted to make a sort of meta comment connecting Professor Kusimba's point about the agency of Africans and not eliminating that or being careful to be mindful of that. And a source that I looked at, which was regarding the abolition of slavery. And in the blurb about it, it very much highlighted sort of the role of British abolitionists and the pressure that Britons put on the rest of Europe, but didn't reference at all the various revolts and ongoing revolts and resistance of enslaved Africans and their descendants. And like the Haitian Revolution, for example, which although not in this specific geographical region of the world, certainly had a huge impact globally on the world economy. So I was just, I think in regards to that, just, encouraging our students to always be thoughtful about sources and what perspectives might not be reflected in them is important in light of the various presentations we heard today.
That's a great point. And in many ways, the British abolition was used as a propaganda tool later on and was not necessarily followed by many of the Europeans either, even while they were blaming other local people for continuing. So, but your points are very well taken. Another one from trade goods. Somebody just pipe up.
Yeah, I think the trade goods change dramatically with the different kinds of modes of transport. You see this in West Africa more dramatically, but perhaps East Africa could enlighten me about this. The impact of steam is extraordinary. In other words, the movement from sail to steam has an extraordinary impact on local production systems. And in effect, what was locally produced for consumption becomes the object of long distance trade when you have large bulky ships be able to take on things not according to the wind patterns, but can steam through any different kind of traffic. And then of course, when you build canals like the Suez Canal, you change the geography of extraction.
Exactly. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, places. Places linked to or on the Indian East Asian coast. Somebody pipe up quick.
I will say that one of the places they were essentially along a trade route, an established trade route, and I would say that they probably were pretty tied to Islam through that, just judging by the practices, and also tied to India. My own experience with that is that in Africa, they are very receptive to any kind of fashions or trends in India. So this is a very old pattern for them. Traditional, more than likely, and traditional goods with strong ties to India. India spreading its influence like that, as well as Islam.
Okay, does anyone else have one on places they'd like to mention for a brief comment?
Yeah, I'll offer something. So this is sort of based on a couple of the things that I was looking at. Like, it just seems like a very cosmopolitan area, like the cultural diversity, but also the economic diversity, not just because of, the fact that so many different goods were traded at many different times, but also because of the fact that like the nature of a sea route and the nature of, trading by sea and the kinds of goods that you are now able to transport on a ship as opposed to the limitations of transporting goods only on land, I think really forced people into more contact and made the people who were involved in the trade route more reliant on the settlements around it. And as a result of that, the communities took on this more permanently cosmopolitan flavor, as opposed to some of the more like temporary sort of caravanserai style settlements that are seen more on the Silk Roads that could just sort of pop up and then fade and kind of come in and out of vibrant existence.
Pretty much what I thought. I thought that was pretty much like the African Silk Road.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to jump to groups 11 and 12 and then go backwards through the other ones. So I just want to make sure we don't have the last group feel like the last group. So a couple of comments on the long distance trade evidence.
I would like to start with the production of chocolate and how vanilla, and I thought it was a fabulous read, but it talks about how the Aztecs used vanilla as an ingredient in producing the chocolate, and that it had actually been exported to, well, of course, the Aztecs had it before the discovery of the Americas by the Spaniards, but then it went to Spain. And then from that area, it made it to the Swahili coast or that whole Indian Ocean area. And now it's there where they're producing it the most, and one country in particular, the Seychelles Islands. So it's fascinating from this side of the world that it makes it over there. And vanilla is one of the most expensive spices that's used today. So.
Okay, great. Another one from that group?
Yeah, to double down on that point, I read about cowrie shells, and being born and raised in West Africa, you think about where these mollusks come from, and the article describes the natural wind currents of the Maldives, bringing these cowrie shells to interior southern Asia, but also reaching Western Africa. And I think that it is a counter-revolutionary point against the fields of academia that argue that there were no intercontinental trade networks between Southeastern Asia, Eastern Africa, Western Africa, and Europe. For example, if you think of the best chocolates in the world, you think of the Belgians or you think of the Swiss. But ironically, those cacao beans and those cowrie shells are there. And one last point, I also think that it's ironic that the cowrie shell was used as currency, but in today's globalized world is used as jewelry instead. So I think that it personifies the economic viability and the vibrancy that the Indian.
But wait, decoration has been very common of putting coins on clothing as a way of storing and displaying your wealth. And the interesting thing about cowries is that they were used as currency because they were rare. They had to be imported. And so they retained that ability to be a store of value and an exchange of currency because they weren't plentiful in the places where they were used in Southeast Asia and as far as West Africa. So that's fascinating. So people were perhaps still displaying those things, you know, when they were wearing them as jewelry. So it's just interesting. Okay, I'm going to jump up to ships and transportation, 2 people, and then I'm going to yield my, or maybe just 1 ship and transportation and 1 traveler, and then we'll move on to Pierre's presentation.
The one thing we noticed was that kind of like the second presentation, all of the geography enabled everyone to have different ships, to use different supplies, etc. And the other thing that was interesting was that for most of these ships, while they started out with one culture creating them, eventually it started to be that other people and other cultures were allowed to use the ships and were part of it. And then Danielle wrote something fabulous at the bottom.
Okay, is there travelers? And I want to be sure that this is our last one so that Pierre doesn't feel shortchanged, even if we go a little bit over time. Yes.
I'm going to talk about Ibn Battuta because I was living in Morocco in 1997 and I tried to find his grave in Tangier unsuccessfully. So I'm a little obsessed with him. So he did his Hajj in Mecca, and then he got as far east as the Volga, according to what we read today. I was having a few technical difficulties, so I didn't get to read too much. And then he also got to China. I did read a little bit about Vasco da Gama as well. And then I know he is buried in the Medina and Tangier, so I intend to go visit when I go back. That's as far as I got, sorry.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I hope that you will all download these folders and make use of them as you make it a component of these activities. And I apologize to Pierre if we've gone a little bit over. It's always ambitious to work in this many groups, and I appreciate your comments and your thoughtfulness and adaptability in getting it done. So thank you very much to all of you and to Elsa for including me in this. And I turn it over to Elsa to Pierre.
Thank you so much, Susan. This was so informative, and you've really put together an incredibly useful set of resources that are directly usable, engaging with such far-reaching and broad-based knowledge on the region. So thank you. This is really, as I mentioned earlier, a way to for you to gain various tools to work with knowledge of the region, and this is certainly an incredibly useful one. So thank you.